Welcome to Writing Sustainability Plans and Statements with Shane Malone-Murphy, a training workshop for CCA Jerwood Supports Programme. Shane Malone-Murphy is a Wicklow-based artist who graduated with a first-class honours in sculpture and combined media from Limerick School of Art and Design and holds a professional certificate in sustainable exhibition making from Creative Futures Academy with National College of Art and Design. Shane works with Kunstverein Aughrim as technical support and sustainability consultant. The session will take the form of a webinar where you will see Shane's screen. Please remain on mute with cameras off. This will be followed by a Q&A during which we will change to gallery view. You are then welcome to turn on your cameras and on mute for questions. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to you all for joining us today, and thank you to Shane, Thank you to Shane for delivering this training. Shane, I will now hand this over to you.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Laura, for that lovely introduction. This is writing sustainability plans and statements. And this is my first time sort of giving a workshop in writing sustainability plans and statements. Normally, the way I work is that an organization will contact me and will slowly build up over a while the needs and the wants of the organization and what it can do. So this will be a sort of quick overview and sort of reflection on how to write one, why to write one, what needs to be done, sort of topics that can be incorporated into sustainability and what sustainability means for an organization and what it sort of means for specifically the sort of artistic cultural sector. So a brief overview of me was already sort of covered, but I don't come from like a science background, environmental science background or anything. I come from an artistic background. So in my degree, when I was studying sculpture, a lot of my work, my practice revolves around issues concerning land and land use and narratives surrounding land. And I sort of became very sensitive and very frustrated with issues surrounding the environment that I was talking about within my own work. And I never felt as though it was appropriate to be talking about land whilst working in unsustainable artistic practices or unsustainable materials and stuff. So that's sort of where I first sort of started my journey on learning about sustainability, was to sort of ease my own anxieties and sort of be more authentic with my own practice. And then once I left college, I worked with EVA International as a technician, and I was sort of very fascinated by how large EVA was. I think it's not a very large staff. I think there's like three people that do the whole thing on the tech team, but sort of working on an exhibition of that scale in terms of the amount of venues, the amount of artists, dozens of different artists in these different countries that they're all coming from, I sort of became very aware of how that worked on a sort of systematic scale and where my work could hypothetically fit into as a system like a biennial, and if that's the right sort of way of presenting my work. And I was lucky enough that one of the artists that I was working with at EVA, Shirley O'Sullivan, we got on very well, and I really loved her work previously to installing it. And then she was mentioning how she was running this course in CFA in sustainable exhibition making. And it seemed like the perfect fit because as a technician, you're like forced to sort of balance practical internal perspective of a gallery with the installation and the artists and how that all works. And then as an artist, I couldn't help but wonder, where do I fit in terms of, am I artist, am I technician, am I concerned with all these different things? So it seemed like the best way to sort of ease my anxieties and actually get real proper training and get an actual certificate in sustainability to help me move on with this. So then bit about my background, yeah, and then currently I'm working with the Courthouse Arts Centre and Music Network to create a climate action plan with native events, which is brilliant. And that's a kind of a slightly different area that I normally work in, because it's mainly large outdoor events that they work with, but it's brilliant because the courthouse occupy both these sort of centres as an art centre. So yeah, that. And then, so simply, what is a sustainability plan? It might seem really basic to ask, but it's not necessarily something that a lot of organizations, when they're starting out, think about what, or it's not an area of concern usually. They're more concerned with getting going in the first place. So, what is it? At its most basic, sustainability plan is just a list of self-imposed rules, aims, principles, or goals for an individual or organization that can help minimize their negative environmental impact and promote positive impact on the environment. So it's essentially a policy that allows an institution to be able to sustain itself and its work and its environment across sort of each sort of sphere of influence that it has. That should be continually improved, continually reflected on, updated regularly to fit the specific institution itself, as to what levers, what agency the actual institution has. And what's most important in starting writing a plan is to get a full understanding as to where you currently are in regards to sustainability and where you want to be. And that can be anything at all when writing it. And the current guidelines for the Arts Council are to sort of reduce your carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. But the policy can be as robust or as flexible as you want in order to sort of reach those goals. So the next question would be why? Why to write a sustainability plan? So other than the obvious of trying to promote environmental impact, why is it that cultural institutions themselves should be concerned with these things as a sector? So one of the benefits, I think, of sustainability plans is it becomes a tool for cultural institutions to use to advocate and articulate the agency that they have to fight against environmental emergency. And what is it about the work that cultural institutions themselves do that can help? And oftentimes when I'm talking to institutions, organizations, or galleries, it sort of comes down to this idea of what can art do? What do cultural institutions that feel that they can do? And in the face of the environmental emergency, that is to say, where do organizations have agency as a sector, or artists have agency as a body, as a sector, and where do we believe our agency resides as a sector? So what a sustainability plan can do is if there is a misalignment between these two things, that where we believe we have agency and where we actually have agency, to bring those two things back into alignment, which usually means expanding the sense of agency and finding strategies that fit for each specific organization. And when speaking to organizations, there's sort of two principles that they feel as though they have the most amount of agency. And one is in reducing the organization's own impact, which means reducing carbon emissions, reducing waste, so forth. And the other is raising awareness, which I think is a particular tool that arts spaces have, as opposed to sort of more rigid disciplines in terms of art as a tool is able to hold a lot of things in tension together without them sort of contradicting things. or each other. So yeah, so then usually, however, it's usually more complex and nuanced than just between the sort of polarity between raising awareness and reducing carbon emissions. Like art and artistic institutions operate more across a continuum that is in fact a very large tip of a very large iceberg. The race between raising awareness and carbon reductions. A sustainability plan has as its ultimate goal, or purpose, would be to instill a sense of environmental purpose throughout the entire organization. And when talking to organizations, there seems to me a sense that while launching research projects, publications, exhibitions, and events, those sorts of things can be easily done, or at least like very familiar to organizations, and even finding a community and an audience around such action can be very easy. But what is not given or very easy is how to find the levers or the desire internally to bring about the work of sustainability into synchronicity with the rest of the organization. So a sustainability plan would be about articulating, orientating, or at least like acknowledging the levers that an organization has internally to bring about external change. So building off what I just said, and this may be slightly soapboxing a little, and this table isn't set in stone, and you can play with it depending on whichever culture, institution, or environment you're in. But around this question of what is art for in terms of sustainability in relation to the environmental emergency, what I often try to do when working with institutions is to put beside what art can do, is then what it would then prompt for culture institutions to become, what they may need to become. And it's not just semantics, cultural spaces as conveners, sanctuaries, platforms. It's that cultural institutions need to behave, need to distribute their funds, reach out to networks, organize the way in which the sort of door is crossed in a sense, and how they behave the artists differently in different ways according to which role they are taking on with that sort of project with the artists, or with long-term sort of curatorial project. And when we talk about ecology and the environment, there's a state where the transformation of the institution itself, its sort of support structure comes into question, I think, and cannot withstand the necessary changes while still taking account of itself. And what a sustainability plan can do for a cultural sector is to sort of help promote transformation within a institution whilst also enacting it itself. So it's not just sort of saying these things, but it can also transform itself and be both sort of acting and reacting at the same time. And this isn't institutional critique or anything, but I really do believe in the capacity for institutions to change. And this can be like very awkward, and oftentimes it's very slow. But I wouldn't be working with institutions if I didn't think there was some mileage to this idea of sustainability within institutions. And I don't think it's necessarily institutional to say that in moments of crisis, the first reaction of an institution or an individual is to sort of self-protect. But when writing a policy around sustainability, around the environment, it can help you sort of push past that imperative of self-protection, which is easy for me to say in a sense, because obviously directors and curators have to feel this a lot more than me, for example. But I think when we push past that feeling, when we start to use words like sustainability, not just mean the organizations on sustainability, but sort of become an organization that attends to the well-being of the planet. And I believe that has a long-term effect. An organization that attends to the well-being of the planet will attend to the well-being of the organization itself. So the first steps when writing a policy. Actually, I think just before I get onto that, if it's possible for people to on their phone scan this QR code, and it should bring you to a site to which you can answer a couple of questions just to have some interaction. If it's not working, you can just say in the chat and stuff. But you should just to get a sense of where our understanding is. Yeah, so cost number one. Yeah, apathy and cost. Yeah, apathy is definitely a massive one in terms of like, yeah, so overwhelming. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Yeah, I think this shows a lot. Like when writing a policy, it can be kind of awkward sometimes because it does sort of force an organization to attend to these things like apathy and attending to anxieties of overwhelming hopelessness. But it can help a lot of the time because it gives you a chance to acknowledge your own agency and what you can do in terms of promoting sustainability. And then I just have one more thing that pops up. So where do you think your agency as a sector lies? Or as an individual or as an artist? Oops. Yeah. That might be it. We'll go back to the presentation then. So hopefully I'll be able to sort of answer some of these or at least ease some anxieties around apathy or senses of being overwhelming and in regards to sustainability. So first steps. These are very basic steps, but it would be to nominate a dedicated person or team for the role of a sustainability consultant. And that is mainly because it's a lot to do. It's a lot to do for one, if someone's bound, or for a whole organization to do in terms of changing everything they do. It's a lot for each person to take account. So when one person is in charge, they can find all the research and they can sort of probe each part of it whilst talking to all levels of staff. But it's important that this person is accountable for what they do and is respected by all levels of staff, that there's all staff know that this is a priority for an organization, and then they need to be transparent and honest. And then the main step then would be to calculate the carbon footprint. So there are different tools for measuring your carbon footprint. So there's 3 different ones here, and they each all have their own benefits. The WWF one is a lot more for individuals, and then Judy's Bicycle and the Gallery Climate Coalition, they are purpose made for galleries, for arts workers, for different types of arts organizations. The Judy's Bicycles one is good because it gives you a whole breadth of different events. It has like exhibitions versus like talks versus webinars versus musical performances and stuff like this. And then the Gallery Climate Coalition one is usually from my understanding of it, it puts a lot of weight on transport and travel, particularly flights and stuff, which isn't necessarily a concern for a lot of galleries. Not every gallery works with flying artworks in from New York or I'll give you a sense of where to start and then a baseline of what amount of carbon you're emitting, and then how to give you a top sort of line that you can work on lowering the amount of emissions from. So then when writing your policy, 3 main areas of concern would be your building, so the actual space, your staff, and your work. And the main areas of concern for building would be your energy, your waste, your water usage, and your community. These stuff, it's quite sort of fundamental sort of stuff in the sense of that we all know that lighting it's good to have energy efficient bulbs and have low flow taps and water saving devices and use eco-friendly things, but it's about putting it like on paper and reminding staff about it, and to sort of have that desire internally within the staff that they wouldn't think of doing it otherwise. By turning off lights when you go and when you leave a room, and reducing the amount of waste. And then staff would be travel and transport. Encourage all staff to travel by public transport and trains when possible, allowing parking for bikes. And then actually discuss with your staff the training that, or the sort of level, the quality that you expect of them. So include all policies in a staff handbook. They are all aware of the policies and they agree with the policies and they want to actually do that work, do the work that's within them. And then if they have concerns and if they have questions, to talk to them about it and to sort of find out where sort of maybe the chinks in the chain are and how to sort of flatten them out. So a good way to do that is to include green agendas in staff meetings. So however frequently you have staff meetings or sort of moments of self-reflection, to sort of include 10 minutes of what you can do to help be more environmental for each week, each moment. So then your work. So the work of arts organizations is largely exhibitions. So is usually what they try to focus on. And it's where I'd be most comfortable talking about it. Like each building is different and each sort of staff is different because they're largely things that are already in in place in a lot of spaces. But in terms of sustainable exhibitions, it can be very difficult because there's a whole other sets of timelines in place and deadlines and audiences you want to reach. So I'll try hopefully speak about how an environmental approach to curating can result in different types of exhibitions. And there's a different sort of image, aesthetic, identity that comes when you start thinking about curation environments. So methodology, so make a list of all the steps needed to set exhibitions. These are very basic things, but I guess the objective of a lot of this would be to understand the environmental issues related to the exhibition making, and to measure the direct and indirect impacts that this practice has on the environment and to identify solutions to work with. So when making an exhibition from concept to artist to venue, duration, production, transport, all these things, if you can think about how each one of them, there's a sort of mode that we work in or are expected of, that we expect to encounter these, but these sort of standards can change. And I'll talk about that. So some of the artistic decisions around curating environmentally would be to include fewer artists, artworks, or objects, and specifically like the duration of exhibitions and to reduce the number of exhibitions. It may be quite scary for some institutions to enact or to think about, sort of be supporting less artists or workers in a sense, but when it's important that like timelines change when talking about these sorts of things. So if you're working with an artist and you want them to work more sustainably or to work more in line with your own sustainable goals, that maybe they need 2 years to work on this project rather than 1 year, and they may need support from you for that. So ways to do that, we can work with more local artists, or you can recycle or revive previous exhibitions that don't require the same amount of transport work to be behind the scenes. So with artworks, create a fair balance between the exhibition of already produced artworks and newly commissioned artworks. Ask artists how they produce their work and add a commitment to green working standards and contracts. So as an artist, the main concerns for me in a way would be the cost of working with sustainability and the amount of time that you need to do it. And if an artist starts working with a gallery and they have the sort of policy in place, they can then more align their own practice and know if they want to work with the gallery. So examples of environmentally sustainable artist studio practices would be selecting materials from ethical or renewable sources and from suppliers that involve short transport distances. Studios prefer low impact travel to meet the studios. Studios large because they're sharing it, printing small size of inks, recycled paper, and share resources. And then materials when exhibiting. So oftentimes in shows, people create sort of temporary structures, temporary stud walls, use MDF or plywood. And a lot of the times there's only a certain lifespan within these materials themselves, and they can't necessarily be reused all the time. So when planning the exhibition, it's important to have, if you are going to be using materials like this, to understand or have a goal as to where these materials will end up, and where they exist after the exhibition finishes. So again, this sort of speaks to time scale of things. If you need more time to do work or to make the sort of materials of the exhibition sustainable, you need to sort of reflect on that and sort of build into the very core of your work. There's a couple resources there on how to, on certain ones, some might be more applicable than others, but it's good when working with artists to share these with them as well, so they know. So like Future Materials Bank is a brilliant website that is a huge big archive of all sorts of materials, of ink made using walnuts to anything under the sun that you can think of. They're all little case studies of artists who have all sort of discovered these new materials themselves that are all sustainable. And sustainablematerials.com is and then vinyl lettering. So this is like such a staple in exhibitions, but it is often non-biodegradable and can remain in landfills for decades to centuries. And when working with artists or exhibitions, if you can try get ones that have at least 80% biodegradable resources, or hire a sign painter and paint is a lot easier to recycle a lot of time. Like you have there's a lot of other materials or media that you can use instead of vinyl that are more if you just paint over paint, or you can scrape it off, or use watercolors or all these other things. And even I worked with one space before, and instead of using vinyl lettering, we installed wooden panels onto the walls and got them laser cut, saying the different the information of the exhibition onto these wooden panels. It's a very large sort of billboard type thing. And then after the exhibition, these were then sanded. The laser etching was then sanded off, and then there was a clean word, and they were then reused again to be used as an exhibition text. So sort of thinking these things, but I know that changes the look of exhibitions to have this huge big billboard, but it's about sort of opening up a sort of space for a new sort of way of curating to form, and what that sort of means for any organization's identity. So flights, this is quite it depends on the sort of organization or the individual, but when I was working with Kunstverein Aughrim, or when I worked with Kunstverein Aughrim, the largest impact that KBA had was a flight to the artists that needed to happen in our foot for them to work with catering. And there's only so much you can do in a sense, but as like KBA is quite a rural space, but it's about sort of being sensitive and working with artists in order to like either just refuse to have flights that don't need to not happen, to avoid air travel as much as possible, and substitute video conferencing for meetings, sessions, interviews, pre-record talks, and then if travel does have to happen, there's a lot of resources there to more accurately plan how the most sustainable way of working with an artist and with the timeline. So then waste is another major issue, which is quite scary. So I remember hearing that it's like CCing someone on an email is the same as leaving a light on for 20 minutes, which is kind of terrifying. Think about how many emails are sent and how many unnecessary CCs are made. But selling computers, printers, and other IT equipment go in power saving mode when not in use is very important. And it's even PDFs, they're a massive one. So if you need to send a PDF, when creating exhibitions, there's huge amounts of plans and mock-ups and everything that happen. If this is to be shared with loads of people to create space on your website or a shared space that people can access it through a link rather than directly emailing a very large PDF to people. And if you have a website to change its web post, you can look powers of servers with renewable energy. And even simple things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, like fonts that you use. So certain fonts are more sustainable than others, if you believe it. So fonts like Calibri that are much thinner, they use less ink and they use less pixels and require less energy to produce across very large scales. So when printing things, have the minimum amount of exhibition text that are necessary to use recycled papers and to have plans for unused ones that really go into an archive to get shared, to get repurposed. And then in terms of sort of practical advice or how to afford to be sustainable as a huge hurdle facing organizations. And there's only so much advice that I can sort of give to this in terms of blanket statement. But I think the best way is through these things called strategic climate funds. So they're basically a fund that's set up by an organization, so a separate bank account that you fund by imposing this sort of internal carbon tax based on continuous monitoring of carbon in each event, performance, or anything at all. So Dewey's Bicycle, which is a brilliant site in terms of learning about sustainability, they recommend between 50 to 100 euro per ton of carbon unit, which is quite high, I think. But it can be whatever for each organization. It can be whatever amount you see fit. It can be €5, it can be £10, it can be anything well. But the reason why SCFs are good instead of like saying buying carbon offsets for flights is that it allows you to generate a fund to which you can dip into in order to buy things like solar panels or purchasing more environmentally efficient transport options for artists, even things like buying pollinators for gallery gardens, or anything at all that any sort of hurdle that you're facing, it allows you to sort of create a fund to sort of platforms supporting environmental sustainability within the UK. And a lot of these spaces have their own policies and their own sort of definitions of sustainability. So it's good when you begin to write a policy to look at other organizations in your area or in your field or in your sort of, or on specific projects, what they have done and how that can reflect that. So that's all. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge and information that has been sourced and gathered through experience and also through studying.